The telecom industry, it has been leading deal-making this year with almost $150 billion worth of announced takeovers. Joining us now to talk a little bit about what's driving tech and telecom mergers and acquisitions, we have Scott Sperling. He is the co-president at Thomas H. Lee Partners, and also Eric Mandl, senior managing director at Evercore Partners. Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Scott, let me begin by putting it to you. Sure. Technology mergers and acquisitions. This seems to be just an ongoing thing. We take a look at companies like Oracle, like IBM. Are they doing this because they can't grow the technology at home? It's just less expensive and more efficient to buy other companies?
It's actually a combination of a couple of different things. They have these enormous, if you will, distribution platforms, the ability to put product into a variety of different markets. They have the service expertise that often is necessary to differentiate products. And oftentimes what they're looking for are technologies that can fit a need and fill a need that some of their customers have that they can buy. It looks like they're buying at relatively high prices, but yet when they take it through their platform, they can actually drive the revenues of that business pretty significantly.
Eric Mandl, I want to pick up on something that Scott was talking about, this idea that as a technology company, you're trying to find things that your customers really want. Is there another challenge, which is somehow integrating the new company? Because we always hear about whether an acquisition is really a success, or is it just a game of, cutting a lot of workers and somehow you arrive at new market share figures?
It's a great question, Pimm, and what's so interesting to me is that's what the institutional community and the press is focused on. Is this a successful acquisition? Why did you make it? What are the 5 reasons that you think will help make it a success? And the key thing I can point to is whether a large company that typically has a lot of cash and might have a fantastic solution but has those gaps, can they find an acquisition that fills those gaps and does 2 things. The first thing is, can you add it to a customer that is already existing? Does the customer say, IBM, HP, EMC, Cisco, I'd rather buy from you than that little company because you're now providing that offering to me. But the second thing, which is much more interesting, and that's where the real stress is, if you're a head of M&A at one of these firms, this is what you're the most worried about. Can I acquire a new customer and keep it? And talking about the stress for these folks that try and identify these acquisitions, and that's where we spend all of our time, how do you identify a company where you can balance the ability to pay a fair price that you believe is fair and still be able to extract a return that you believe your customers will like? And that is the essence of this M&A dance that we have right now. And obviously a lot of the stress also comes from whether these companies are able to go public or not, because you're also bidding against yourself when trying to identify those assets.
Bidding against yourself. Scott, does this mean that there are just a handful of those technology leaders? Because we seem to sort of get this crop. We talk about social media. That's hot for a while. Or we talk about certain types of discrete chips that go into mobile handsets. Those are hot for a while. Right. Is there a trend that you can identify
I actually think it covers a very broad spectrum. So you're talking about, you mentioned some things that are relatively advanced technologically. I also think it can apply to things that you don't necessarily think of as technologically advanced, but where the acquisition of a company that can bring some technology to bear on a very broad platform can make a meaningful difference. So for example, Clear Channel, which is the world's largest radio and outdoor advertising company, was able to buy a little company called Thumbplay about a year or so ago, take the technology that this company had and create something that was just recently introduced. In fact, the big introduction was this huge event in Las Vegas called iHeartRadio. And iHeartRadio allows you on any of your mobile devices to listen to 850 radio stations very easily. So if you like Z100, and you're not satisfied because there's only 2 or 3 other stations you can hit on the dial, then you can go to iHeart and not only listen to Z100, the Clear Channel station here, but you can listen to KISS in LA, you can listen to KISS 108 in Boston, similar sorts of stations. It also allows you to do the same kind of customizable radio as a Pandora, only with 11 million songs rather than 900,000. How did that happen for an older media company? It was able to introduce a product like that.
Someone saw something,
so
right?
We saw something. You saw an acquisition. vision of one of these companies. And so you were able to actually take a little technology company, graft it onto this enormous traditional media company, and still have something very successful.
My guests are Scott Sperling of Thomas H. Lee Partners, also with us Eric Mandl of Evercore Partners. Eric, this idea of large technology companies making acquisitions, folding them into their business, and then turning them into successes. Tell me about Google and Android.
So probably one of the greatest success stories you can find in the world of technology. Google ends up buying a company, tiny by comparison based on what it's grown to today, but rich with what we call in the technology world open source technology. And open source technology allows the buyer or the owner of an asset to go out to a developer community and allow them to leverage the ability to build the intellectual property that you use in your product.
It's free almost.
It's free. It's outsourced R&D. So what Google did is they entered into a market that when they did, you had guys like RIM and Nokia with complete control. And the amount of disruption that they created using not only open source, but using a technology that allowed people to build apps the way they want to, a very open system, to basically create a massive amount of disruption in the handset market. And you look at the statistics today, 2010, there were about 400 million, 500 million, what we call smartphones. And forecasts say 2014, 2015, that's probably going to be around 2 billion. So, one for every 3 people on planet Earth. And, a lot of those people are going to want to use a cheaper system, and a cheaper system is Android.
Scott Sperling, I've got a list of the directorships that you've held. I mean, you've been on the board of Clear Channel. You've been on the board of, Live Wire, Wyndham Hotels. How do you educate a board to be willing to take the big risk to disrupt their own business before someone on the outside does it for them?
Well, I think you actually gave an answer in your question, which is we have to recognize that the nature of disruptions that occur in business today, whether it's because of technology, and it often is technology, or other forces, a change in the way things get distributed or manufactured, means that the company has to continually challenge itself and be willing to disrupt the way it does things in order to remain on top. And so one of the things that we do with our companies is we work with them extensively at the board level. We take some of our operating people and put them deep inside of the company with the objective of helping create a culture of constantly trying to reevaluate how we do things, look at ways that we can do it better. Yes, we may be an industry leader, but we still want to take market share. We still want to outperform that industry. How do we do that? How do we challenge the conventional wisdoms? So that has to permeate from the board down, and from the lower levels of the organization. You have to have a company whose senior management's willing to let that percolate back up. And a lot of that tone is set by the interaction that the board has with the senior management of the company, making them understand that it's okay not to make that narrow monthly or quarterly earnings if what we're doing is really trying to drive ourselves to be a much more efficient and effective competitor going forward.
So we're talking about mergers and acquisitions in technology and telecommunications. My guests are Eric Mandl. He joins us from Evercore, and Scott Sperling from Thomas H. Lee Partners. Scott, what kinds of new technology do we need to be paying attention to? We do a lot about social media. We talk a lot about mobile. You talked about some of the technologies. They may not seem that cutting edge, but they'll change real businesses.
Well, the key thing is to allow businesses to more effectively execute their own business plans and to improve their business model to be more profitable and to serve consumers better. And so we're looking at technologies that can help other companies do their job better. And so oftentimes this hidden plumbing, if you will, that goes on is not as well known as some of the larger names that we're talking about, but they often make an enormous difference to the success of a whole series of companies and therefore have an enormous impact. So it's oftentimes the types of technologies that allow things to be delivered faster, without interruption, to be able to maximize the use of existing bandwidth, because bandwidth is very short, to be able to deliver content in ways that are more innovative than others. That's a very important element that all of our companies look at as they deliver products. And as an investor, it's part of the areas that we tend to look at.
Eric Mandl, any specific technologies we need to pay attention to?
Probably the biggest trend we're seeing in tech right now is what mobile is doing to everything. And you hear the term cloud computing all the time, almost to the point where you can't take it anymore. Well, the truth is that it's very important, because when people access the internet on a smartphone, the data that they access, the way they communicate with others, the content that they access has to be taken from the cloud. So when that data is there, how do you put it there? How do you access it? How do you keep it safe? Arguably, there are companies that can virtualize it, meaning if you have a whole server farm, how do I multiply basically the storage power within my farm? And what that does is it creates a tremendous amount of disruption for the established larger companies, and they have to focus on the smaller guys to buy.
I want to thank you, gentlemen, very much. Eric Mandl joining us from Evercore. Also, I want to thank you very much, Scott Sperling from Thomas H. Lee Partners.